Victoria 3 is truly the most mid-Paradox grand strategy game on the market right now. It's suffering from the classic Paradox blues of being a fresh game with no DLC to flesh it out. So far, the DLCs that have come out have not been well received, and many people have heralded the death of the game. Some have even thrown it down the path of Imperator Rome, and others yet cling to hope from the upcoming Sphere of Influence major expansion. It's undeniable that Victoria 3 has problems in its current form, and that this has turned off many people from the game. The extent to which these problems ruin the game is where people argue. Just like with CK3, many people believe that more DLC will be the solution, and with CK3, DLC certainly did help put the game on a better path. That being said, Crusader Kings 3 came out with a much stronger start than Victoria 3. The purpose of this video is to talk about whether Victoria 3 is worth the wait or not, and what I mean by that is whether the direction the game is heading in implies that the game will morph into something people like. Right now, the game is undeniably headed towards obscurity, as fewer and fewer players come back and more DLC falls flat. This will not be a video where I proclaim whether it's worth the wait or not as an objective stance, but rather I'm going to construct a couple straw men of Victoria 3 players and explain what they likely are looking for, followed by my take on whether the game is going in that direction. For a simple example, if you like war games, I'll tell you that Victoria 3 probably isn't worth the wait. That one is simple because everyone knows Victoria 3 isn't trying to be a war game, how its sibling franchises are, and I doubt anyone would argue that. Victoria 3 is composed of a triangle of mechanical focuses in my opinion, and those three are the economic simulator, the great power diplomacy game, and the society simulator. I'm going to look at the game from those perspectives, but as we go, I might have some other perspectives to put forward as well. Before we get into things, this is a longer video than you might want if your only purpose is to get an idea of what's wrong with Victoria 3. If you want something shorter, I'd recommend Tobias' video on the topic, which I watched while working on the script. It's a great, short video about what's wrong with Victoria 3. Link in the description. With that out of the way, let's talk about Victoria 3. Victoria 3 suffers from a sort of aloof lack of engaging gameplay. This game actually reminds me of a low-stakes 4X game, like a playing tall Civ 5 game. You play the macro game, and don't do much actual short-term decision-making. In Civ 5, that's one particular style of play, which often falls to the wayside of a more action-oriented strategy, but it certainly does function. In Victoria 3, the only playstyle is the macro game. That's not necessarily a bad thing, but Victoria 3's macro gameplay is underpinned by what might seem like an interesting undercroft of world economies and markets. It's easy to get lofty about outcompeting foreign markets or crashing foreign industrial sectors with cheap goods and so on, but the reality is that every market is so isolated from every other market that trade has basically no impact on your market balance. At most, trade might account for a small percentage of your market unless you have a complete lack of a resource. For example, if you're Prussia importing dyes from the Dutch market, that will account for 100% of your dyes. But it can only provide a meager number of dyes at the end of the day, just because of how trade routes work. What that means is that the game doesn't provide a particularly interesting interaction between markets. That leaves the option of complexity inside a market. The highest level of depth in Victoria 3 is the internal market interaction with supply chains and infrastructure to account for. But the problem is how these systems are more or less solved after a pretty short period of time. Your most important resources are coal and iron, since that lets you make steel. With steel come engines, and then railroads. Once you have railroads, your growth is only limited by your population. Other agricultural resources can be important for certain sectors, like dyes, silk, and cotton, but acquiring these resources isn't particularly hard. To be clear, this isn't a complaint about difficulty. Although the game is hilariously easy, the game wouldn't be fixed if the game were just adjusted to be harder. Instead, the problem is that of simplicity. If I'm playing a country like, say, Mexico, I likely don't have a particularly strong navy. Let's say I do get enough of a navy to make a little conquest off in Southeast Asia and secure myself some coffee that I use for my local market. Well, that coffee will ship back to Mexico completely untouched. Are you kidding me? Where are the pirates that plague the seas? Do I not have to dedicate any military ships to protecting my trade routes? During war, this is accounted for, with hostile nations raiding convoys, but are we going to pretend the seas are completely safe during peacetime? There's a reason why a powerful navy was so necessary to imperialism in the past. To be even further clear, I'm not asking explicitly for piracy in the game. This is just one example of missing depth. I could spend hours talking about theoretical mechanics I'd add in order to complexify the game, but that's not really what I'm going for. The pirate example is an example of a lack of complexity. In the 1.5 beta patch, which I've played a little bit, the game is starting to implement local prices for most goods so that there's more of a sense of each state having specialization, which I really like. The problem is that in its current implementation, it's more of an annoyance than an interesting mechanic. Having to ensure every state has enough transportation, electricity, and services for its own local needs makes a lot of sense, but it comes at the cost of having to micromanage each state much more. This, in theory, does create more complex gameplay, but not fun gameplay. It creates meaningless micro instead of interesting, head-scratching strategy. How would I do it? To me, it's all about the give and take of protecting local business or allowing big business to dominate. Let's say I've got a size 200 textile mill in Vienna that produces enough clothes to provide for the entire country if need be, but it's currently not allowed to sell clothes outside of Vienna. I could open it up to sell across all of Austria and Hungary. That sounds great. Cheap clothes for everyone. The problem is that often the countryside of Transylvania, I've got a much smaller size 20 textile mill, and it provides most of the jobs to the locals there. They'll obviously be outcompeted by the mill in Vienna, so it would cause a huge loss of jobs if that mill closed. The only reason it's open is that it is able to provide clothes to the locals in Transylvania who don't have access to Vienna's clothes because of my policy of keeping Viennese clothes out of Transylvania. This will create a price disparity between Transylvanian clothes shoppers and Viennese ones, but the jobs are more valuable to me than the cheap clothes. Now imagine this situation is happening across all of Hungary, with many Hungarians being employed by small-scale textile mills that provide local goods. If that size 200 Viennese textile mill gets access to the entire market, all those small mills will go out of business and be outcompeted. Imagine the layoffs and the consequences of that, especially among an important minority like the Hungarians. See, in this system, the strategy comes from the balance between massive profits from a centralized big business versus the job creation of a decentralized series of small businesses. To me, this would be an interesting thing to be considering in the web of strategy. The current local price implementation just means you'll have to always construct a power plant in every state, and you'll have to overbuild railroads everywhere that there are transportation-consuming industries. See, in the current patch, you already have to build railroads everywhere because of infrastructure, but that doesn't feel as bad because it's not that many. Railroads don't produce a huge amount of transportation, so you might have excesses of hundreds of infrastructure to produce enough local transportation, and it's not some interesting decision. It's just a reality that every state will need railways. I'm not making a decision when I put the railways down, I'm just doing what is necessary to keep the economy going. In the current game, deciding which industries to build first and prioritize is an interesting decision, which is one of the positives in the game. I have to look at my country and evaluate what natural resources I have so I can decide what to build. It's extremely important that the process of decision making is kept. There is no decision making with Paradox's current plan for implementation of local prices, just busy work. So, with that, we come to understand the ultimate woe of Victoria 3, a lack of meaningful decision making. That extends beyond the economics of the game, which is actually a third of the game with the most decision making. If you go into diplomacy of the game, there's very little decision making to be made. Essentially, you pick a couple great powers you want to be friends with, and you pick a couple you want to antagonize, or you just antagonize all of them, to be honest. The AI, even with high aggression, is too incompetent to outpace even a mediocre player, so you keep infamy low, conquer some states for resources you need, build up the economy, then eventually militarize and no longer care about great powers. You can join other wars to try and get in the way of great powers you don't like, but why? It's not like the AI will use the land they conquer for anything useful, and it's not like you can get anything out of the war since you can't add war goals. If you're lucky, the defender might sway you with some war goal you have no interest in, and you can't counteroffer them with something you might actually want. The AI might join against you, and if you're a minor power, then that means either you just lose, or you abuse naval invasions to defeat your target before the great power can defeat you. That's the extent of decision making with regards to diplomacy. I guess you can make trade agreements, but as we discussed in the economic section earlier, trade is too small of a portion of the economy to matter. I've never had a situation where I've had a market so intertwined with another nation that us ending a trade agreement or entering into war would actually shake the economy. Being embargoed by the economic giant of Britain won't really affect you unless you're a small nation which drives 100% of a particular good from the British market. Let's not go back to economics. Diplomacy-wise, puppet relations have no effect on anything, and dominions can join wars against you, so you might want to improve relations with them. Sometimes, even nations with whom you have maxed out relations might still join wars against you because the sway system is horrifically opaque, and there's no way to figure out if anyone would join for or against your wars without declaring it and spinning the wheel of diplomacy. If you're an experienced player, you can start to get a little bit of an instinct for it, but even then, as an experienced player myself of 700 hours, you never really can be sure. So that's the diplomacy section. Not much to cover. How about society building? You've got just a little bit of control over that, but I'll be charitable and say that it probably should be a relatively hands-off experience, so I'm going to be a bit nicer about this. You influence your society building through your decision of what jobs to create in your country. It's a very Marxist analysis, although it certainly isn't as rigid as Marx. There will be proletarian workers who support capitalism, and there will be industrialist capitalists that might support the communist intelligentsia, which I think is good. Whatever Marxist might think, workers and owners are not monoliths that always support either the suppression or uplifting of workers. Most pops aren't even political, which is also extremely true to reality. Most people just mind their own business. Anyway, decision making is in minor forms of which laws to pass domestically, which buildings to build so that you get the pop ideologies you want, and whether to suppress, bolster, or ignore certain interest groups. It's not complex, but I do respect a hands-off society simulator, and honestly, I'm okay with how things are in the game. I only wish I could suppress certain ideologies as opposed to just interest groups. For example, if a communist leader came to power in the intelligentsia and my nation were suppressing communist ideas, then I'd like to see the intelligentsia suddenly losing clout, or maybe gaining clout even if my suppression isn't outweighing the cry for communism or something. With how things currently work, a capitalist might support the intelligentsia while there's a market liberal in charge, and if that market liberal is ousted for a communist, that capitalist will continue supporting the intelligentsia despite the whiplash from moving from completely market liberal capitalism to cooperative ownership communism. It shouldn't be the case that ideology goes top down, but rather it should be from the bottom and seep upwards. Political parties are composed of the people that support them, not the other way around. I'd like it if pops, instead of aligning with an interest group, aligned with maybe 1 to 3 ideologies tiered by priority, and picked a party that best suited that set of ideologies. The vast majority of pops would still be apolitical, depending on how radical they are. Obviously, radical pops should not be apolitical. It'd also be really fun to browse your pops in a state and check every pop's ideologies to see how the country is moving, or to find some really interesting combinations, since some people can have seemingly incomprehensible ideological combinations. Imagine a capitalist that believes in social democracy at the highest priority, while also believing in market liberalism and something more innocuous like pacifism at the bottom. They'd believe in pensions and education thanks to social democracy, but also want laissez-faire economics due to their market liberal ideals. Tack on wanting an end to colonization and a national militia or something because of pacifism. The only obvious problem with this is how much more computational power it might take to calculate all of this, which I'm totally willing to accept would be a real roadblock. I'm not a technical person, so I have no answers to that problem. I'm just doing my best to come up with interesting ideas. Okay, that's enough time spent on Victoria's woes. We all know the game is flawed, but identifying the problems accurately and precisely is extremely important to actually coming up with solutions and figuring out the game's appeal. The central question of this video is, will Victoria 3 become a good game, or is Victoria 3 worth the wait? Now I want to dive into that question. No one can see the future, but we can certainly make guesses, and our defining implements are the dev diaries. Most of Victoria's diaries have been bug fixes, and focusing on appeasing the military complainers. The main focus of the upcoming patch, funnily enough, is on the military, which I didn't even talk about in this video. That's because, quite frankly, you can implement a military system as interesting and complex as Hearts of Iron 4 into this game, and all you'd have is the same game with a military system that adds nothing to the rest of the game. To give some credit, the new military stuff is implementing things like mobilization goods. You'll have to give your soldiers food and spend transportation on them, and so on. That's good stuff, as it creates another layer of decision making. It's unfortunately not addressing the underlying problem with the game's economy, and this is where I shall divine an important future of Victoria 3. I do not see Paradox going back and fixing what they've built, only building more stuff on top to try and bury the flaws, and to me, that's a killer. Victoria 3's core is rotten because of the woes I talked about in the previous section. There's just not enough decision making in the game with any relevance, and no number of mechanics like companies with +1 landowner approval or food eating armies can fix that. Let me ask you this. If you've played Victoria 3, then comment below, what do you do in each moment of gameplay? I'll give you a second. My answer is nothing. If you've ever seen my guides, you'll notice that the gameplay is massively front-loaded. Right at the beginning, making decisions is important since you can plan the economy a bit, decide what regions of the world you want for yourself, and get an idea of what laws you want to pass. Moment-to-moment gameplay is mostly observation and adaptation. Did you overbuild iron mines? Okay, put some tools and steel down to shore up demand. Need dyes? Scan for a small country with dyes you can conquer and maybe a big war breaks out, maybe it doesn't. Even if it's a big war, just win it with naval invasions and go AFK, as I often do when recording those guides. If the game is so uninvolved that you can go AFK, you've got a problem. I'm genuinely curious what you would answer down in the comments, because you might levy this criticism at Crusader Kings 3 or Europa Universalis 4, but allow me to go off for a minute about what those games give you in terms of things to do moment to moment. In Crusader Kings 3, there's pretty much always events going on that I have to make decisions around at least, but beyond that, I need to find good marriages and keep an eye on my vassal opinions. I need to manage my stress and check for claimants. I need to search for new knights, and the only reason I don't do this is my own laziness. Sometimes, I do speed 5 CK3 and do nothing, but not because I have nothing to do. It's because I'm choosing to eschew some gameplay. In Europa Universalis 4, I'm keeping my eyes out for wars that I can declare where pesky allies will refuse to help the defender. I'm watching autonomy levels and deciding to lower them if I can handle the rebellions. I'm making buildings. Oh, that's quite boring, so bad example. I might be searching for nations I can vassalize, or I'm reorganizing armies to different parts of my empire so I can get ready for a war, or maybe I'm already wrapped up in a war. As with CK3, I can also just speed 5 and spend time if I want to eschew gameplay a bit. In Victoria 3, I will very quickly run out of things to do, even when I want more to do. The checklist of things to do in Europa Universalis 4 is pretty much unending, and that's why Lambda can conquer the world in 28 years, but it'll take literal hundreds of hours in real life. That's why in Crusader Kings 3, you can get 30 plus prowess knights across the board within just a few years, if you want to put the work in, but it'll take time. None of this is required to actually play either game. In Victoria 3, you can play as maximally as possible without about 10 minutes of effort. That's a huge problem. It looks to me like Paradox does not intend to fix this problem in Victoria 3. You can endlessly tack on little nuances to the game, but that won't fix anything. Let's talk about the upcoming Sphere of Influence DLC, which is the first major DLC for the game. One feature we've been shown via the beta patch is the ability to influence the subject nations to change their laws. Let me ask you this. What will that add in terms of complexity to the game? Let's say I'm playing Britain, and I force my Dominion of India to ban slavery. First of all, slavery doesn't really do much in the game to begin with, but cool, I banned slavery in India. Unless the fundamental systems around relations with subjects, laws, and economics in the game change, this will do literally nothing besides help India with its journal entry. We've also talked about being able to change subjects from puppet to dominion, and so on. But again, this is just not very important to fixing the underlying issues. This is where I make the judgment that Victoria 3 will not become a better game. It's possible that the game will get more interesting with new mechanics. In fact, it definitely will get more interesting. Companies and subject autonomy, and even the already implemented mechanics like agitators, do add something to the game. They just don't make the basic game any better. I believe that Victoria 3 players want complex economic interactions and diplomacy. I believe Victoria 3 players want to get an idea of what the society they're building is like. They want to know the beliefs of their average citizen, and why they believe in those things. Victoria 3 players want to build nuanced economies with their own issues and struggles, and they want to compete with foreign economies. See, the only form of competition between nations in Victoria 3 is their militaries. Somehow, Paradox has created an economic simulator where every market is nearly completely isolated from every other market. In only one of my videos, I demonstrate how to crash someone's economy by forcing in cheap goods to their economy. It required me to play as America and achieve billions of GDP, then to subsidize all my industries to force goods into a hyper-cheap pricing, and export to a Britain whose market I opened by force in war. Through that, I was able to make a couple % of my economy reliant on exports, and successfully create mass unemployment in Britain from their inability to outcompete the goods I was shipping to them. It should not be the case that to crash any foreign nation's industry, I have to completely dominate them. It should be easy for an America that specializes in any particular industry to outcompete any other nation that isn't particularly specialized in that good, especially if they force to open the nation's market through war. If America is flooding the world with cheap goods, the only way to stop that ought to be an embargo. Instead, the volume of trade in the game is just so low that it doesn't matter, and unless you literally throw your country into immense debt to overproduce a good, you can't trade in worthwhile volumes. That's because markets don't get intertwined enough. And no, it's not because of tariffs. You can make a trade agreement with a country and cut all tariffs off, and you'll still only be able to export a tiny portion of your market. This is best demonstrated by the ridiculous corn laws journal entry. The real-life corn laws were about keeping the price of grain high in Britain so that farm owners could make tons of money off of it. They did so by raising tariffs on imports and exporting their grain to create artificial domestic scarcity. This is a dramatic oversimplification for a video about a video game. If you're an economist or something, feel free to roll in pain, just stay with me. In Victoria 3, good luck creating artificial scarcity. I can export all the grain to every country out there and subsidize the trade centers so that even trades which are not profitable are still happening, and yet my grain price will only go up a tiny bit. I believe I should be able to so horrifically misrun my nation that I can export the entire nation's grain supply and literally starve my people, but no, I can't. I would accept the argument that that should only be possible under a command economy. Maybe I, as the nation, can't just decide where all the grain goes unless I control the economy directly. You're right about that, to be honest, but guess what? If I become a command economy, I still can't export all the grain I want to export and ruin my own economy. I am entirely willing to accept the fix of, you can ruin your economy but only if you fully control your economy, but I don't see Paradox implementing anything nearly as complex as that. I outlined in my video on ownership methods how unrealistic it is that a nation must only be entirely privately owned, entirely cooperative, or entirely government owned. Why can't an authoritarian traditional monarchy seize private property for the crown, as has happened constantly in history? Okay, sorry, I'm getting dragged into a bit of a tangent. My overall point is that Paradox has no intentions of implementing the complexity that a game like this needs in order to be interesting. When I write scripts for videos like this, I get kind of sad because I really love the Paradox Grand Strategy games and their immense complexity, but Victoria 3 just spits in the face of that. I've made videos about Crusader Kings 3 where I talk about what I want in the game, but that's always with the attitude of, this game is really great, and here's what could build on it even more. Whereas this video's attitude is, this game needs fixes to even have a foundation, why are we implementing new mechanics? How can we have a superfluous mechanic like companies that just stack some modifiers on a particular building type, when simple things like meaningful international trade aren't even in the game? Outside of the scope of this video, I have so many ideas for how to improve the Victoria 3 economic systems, but man, what's the point if Paradox clearly isn't heading in the direction of improving this sort of stuff? In Crusader Kings 3, I made those videos talking about mechanics because clearly the developers of the game have a vision of building on what they've created. If every dev diary was talking about something that I felt was irrelevant to the game's further growth, I likely wouldn't have bothered. And indeed, some of the ideas I've thought of haven't put in CK3. That's not me saying they got the idea from me, but just that some of the mechanics I believe in have also been thought of by the developers. Maybe I'm biased by believing my ideas are better than their ideas. I say maybe, I mean definitely, I like my own ideas, but I think I speak for the community when I say that the direction of the game isn't feeling particularly good. I want to pivot away from the abject complaining and talk a bit about the hopes I have in Victoria 3. I might come across as very negative in this video so far, but I want to assure you that I want this game to succeed, and to help convince you of that, let's talk about the light of hope at the end of the tunnel for this game. Victoria 3 does a couple things well. This is evidenced by my 700 hours in the game. I will first admit to some bias as a content creator, which is that people enjoy the Victoria 3 content, and that is admittedly part of why I've played the game so much. That being said, I've played lots of the game in my own time. Why is that? Well, the game has a certain zen feeling to it. It's nice to see numbers go up, and to experiment with different openings. It can be fun to get creative and imagine the society that you're building, and to roleplay certain ideological playstyles. The first couple decades of the game can give that sense of great power diplomacy that many people are looking for, but the choice around supporting different sides in a war having genuine consequences. It can be fun to try and make a thriving market out of smaller nations, like playing Germany and making customs unions with the Benelux region in Scandinavia. It can be fun to put on colonial resettlement and try and demographically shift part of the world with multiculturalism. These are just some of the things I personally enjoy about the game, and to me, the basic mechanics like economics and war are ways to make the more fun, imagination-oriented parts of the game fun. To be completely honest with you, most of the fun of the game is my own internal storytelling. If I were to judge the game off of just what happens in the game, then there wouldn't be much to say. For me, the ultimate joy is pushing myself to run the economy more and more efficiently. It's trying to balance the inputs and the outputs of my continually complexifying economy so that my capitalists can have big enough profits to keep funding new buildings, and so that my pops can get enough wages to create demand for those goods. I like to send the standard of living through the roof by running nations effectively, and I often feel a strong pride around the nation that I build. Victoria 3 has clearly scratched an itch for the playing tall community, as that's its entire point. I have been able to conquer most of the world and play truly wide, but if you're one of those cringe EU4 or CK3 playing tall enjoyers, this game is perfect for you because it's all you do. In many ways, Victoria 3 has actually perfected the playing tall experience, giving huge incentives to really fuss over each of your states. You can set down edicts to specialize your states and create universities for the states which need educated workers, or perhaps relegate a state to being a mining town or a farming village. Although it really sounds antithetical to the international diplomacy and world trade of the Victorian era, Victoria 3 really pulls you into your own nation, optimizing every nook and cranny. With the coming of companies, which I was uncharitable to in the previous section, you can better become a truly specialized nation that tries to dominate particular industries. Having a company that runs massive iron and coal mines to support your steel industry can feel really good as you effectively synergize the different sectors of your economy. There's a variety of different economic focuses to put your energy into, albeit some are more powerful than others, and all nations need the tools, steel, engine, railway, loop, since infrastructure is central to every nation. Becoming a dominant military power and ripping great powers to shreds can be greatly satisfying once you hit that point, and if a particular power was constantly getting you down, it's satisfying to get revenge on them. Mechanics like agitators, while at first horrifically unbalanced, are actually really interesting and provide a sort of historical grounding for most nations. It can also help circumvent some of the unpredictability of the game, with the ability to exile dissidents being very powerful. What else positive can I really say? I can't expand too much on it because if I expand on these ideas, I get into the weeds, and in the weeds, these positives tend to falter. If you sort of brain off this game, it can be kind of fun to just build up the country and watch the world around you as the AI makes certain plays. Sometimes, America does something interesting, or Britain and France really go at it, and if you're lucky, Super Germany will form. Victoria 3's light is its ability to get you invested in the nation that you're building, no matter the lack of depth. Each time you play the game, things go a bit differently, and it's easy to get invested into the nation's development. I understand that it's not much of a light, but it's something I'd say. There's some kind of enjoyment to the game, or else no one would play it, but I'm not sure if that light will stay lit much longer, to be honest with you, and if you want to abandon Victoria 3, I wouldn't blame you. I don't have much hope for Victoria 3, I'm gonna enjoy it while I can, and I have an open mind. If Paradox can do a good job with Spheres of Influence, then the game I think could be good. But I don't have high hopes for it. I'm not a Victoria 3 hater, nor am I a fanboy. I just see what I see. And Victoria 3 is looking like it's going to have a hard time in the future with how it's being directed. I maintain an open mind and eagerly await further Victoria 3 updates. What do you think? Is Victoria 3 doomed? Do you have hope? Are you a Victoria 3 hater? Are you a Victoria 3 lover? Are you a mod enjoyer? Are you waiting for Open Victoria 2 to come out so you can feel the superiority of playing an old game, but without the massive lack of usability? Let me know below. I also want to say that I often flip-flop on Victoria 3 content on this channel, and I'm pretty sure I'm heading into an off phase of Victoria 3 now, so get ready for some EU4 and CK3, I suppose. Obviously, I'll check out Victoria 3 again when new patches and DLCs come, but no promises on any content unless the game experiences some relatively major changes which would warrant a look back. Also, I've been sick for like 2-ish weeks, and I hope it doesn't sound too bad on the audio. I tried waiting until I felt better, but just taking too long, so I went for it for this video. More videos to come. Thank you for your time.